Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we continue with Part 2, The Ancient Mysteries from the Philosophy of Fire by R. Swinburne Clymer. The Ancient Mysteries. All religious and all occult and mystical schools have their foundation in the ancient mysteries taught in the secret schools of antiquity as they are today. Note, the ancient mysteries, secret doctrines, philosophy of the secret schools, and divine mysteries are synonymous. The belief in a supreme power is inherent in every human being, and so thoroughly interwoven with our nature is this sentiment that it is impossible for anyone at any period of life wholly to divest himself of it. When the reflecting man looks around upon all the objects about him, the question naturally arises, what has called this world into existence? Why does it exist? And what is its ultimate destiny? Why do I exist? And what will become of me after death? The answers to these questions can only be given by and through a long course of philosophical investigation and individual training. These problems have been the study of the ablest men from the earliest ages, and have given rise to all the various systems of philosophy and religion which have prevailed in all times, beginning with the first conscious being and coming down to our own day and generation. Of one thing we are certain, the first religion that we have any account of was far superior to any of those formulated in later centuries, because it was a religion of both living and believing in place of a religion of faith only. I have reference to the philosophy of the Atlanteans. Theirs was the pure fire philosophy. Not only was it a virgin and absolute philosophical religion, but at the same time, it gave them those powers which a truly religious life will always confer upon the faithful neophyte. The philosophy of fire of the Atlanteans not merely inculcated a strict morality, a blameless life and loyalty to the school which taught it, but it likewise demanded obedience to the laws governing health, strength, and power. This philosophy, under whatever name it has since passed, always gives wisdom and power to its initiates. It is only with these philosophies I will deal at the present, and set forth the history and compact form of those systems of philosophy which worship at the shrine of fire, symbol at once of love and of God, and believe this to be all-potent. The philosophers of these systems do not worship the fire as the profane suppose, but recognize the flame of the fire as a symbol of that supreme hierarch which they believe in, and know to be all-powerful and absolute, and which can be personified only by the fire which is life, and love which is eternal. An author has said, it is to be presumed that when the minds of men were directed to the subject of the mysterious things of nature which they could not comprehend, they were forced to conceal their ignorance of the ultimate causes of all the phenomena by which they were constantly surrounded, and as constantly called upon to explain that then, as well as at present, their inventive talents were exercised to conceal their ignorance by systems of terminology. This is not altogether true. The mysteries did not have their origin in such a manner, but rather, because the initiates of these mysteries were aware, it would be unwise to give the true meaning of the mysteries to the masses. Therefore, invented symbols and ceremonies, thereby teaching those who were not prepared to receive the truth, or who were unable to worship God in the abstract. It is, however, conceded that the rites and ceremonies were originally pure in character, and had the power to impress the minds of the initiates with a suitable feeling of awe and reverence for those who taught the mysteries, and likewise a desire to be personally benefited through obedience to the instructions such teachers were willing to give. One who claims to be an authority on the subject has said it is impossible to definitely assert in what country the mysteries were first introduced. Authors differ very materially upon that question. It is, however, very certain that while there are various changes to be found in the mysteries of the different nations of the Orient, there was a great similarity in them all, so much so that we may conclude either that they were all independent copies from a great original system, or that they were propagated one from another until they were spread over the whole of Asia, Europe, and that part of Africa peopled from Asia, and in constant intercourse therewith. The first wave from that region, now known as Aryavata, was to the southeast and across the great rivers into that part of India, where they found a people descended from the Turanian families who had come from the north and northeast. We are informed that when the Aryans entered the country of India, they carried with them traditions, manners, customs, and religious ideas which differed very materially from those possessed by the first inhabitants, who were no doubt of Turanian descent. This author is mistaken in several respects. We know absolutely that these mysteries primarily came from Atlantis, then connected with Yucatan, where the ruins of the fire philosophers still remain, and that the initiation into these mysteries was first had there. We know that in the temples of Atlantis, these mysteries were first taught to the neophytes, and that these mysteries were brought into Asia and India, thence into Egypt by the initiates of the older school of Atlantis. The author may well say, while there are various changes to be found in the mysteries of the different nations of the Orient, it is also certain there was a great similarity in them all. Why should they be unlike in their spirit, though possibly different in the letter, since all of them were from the same source? True, changes have been made in both form and name, but this has only been done to meet the customs and race beliefs of the various people and ages. All the secret schools founded on the fire philosophy come from the one source. In their spirit, they are the same, simply taking form under different names, as the fraternity now called the Rose Cross was known as the Paracelsians, alchemists, and illuminated brethren. It has ever been the same great school under names in harmony with the age and the needs of the peoples. The great school of the Magi, the initiates, the alchemists, and the secret priesthood, known and designated also by other names, has never for a moment ceased to exist. This school has often, though secret and unknown, shaped the course of empires and controlled the fate of nations. France and its Napoleon Marlion is an excellent example. Without the help of the Count Germain, Napoleon never could have been the mighty master of strategy he was, a mastership torn from him when he became self-centered and arrogant, working for glory instead of humanity's good. These initiates and masters, seeking always the line of least resistance and knowing both when and how to act, having always in view only one object, that is, the welfare and progress of humanity and the greatest good to the greatest number, despising fame and worldly honors, working without the hope of fee or reward, concealed their labors and either influenced those who knew them not to do their work or worked through agents pledged to conceal their very existence. To the public generally, which cannot comprehend why one should do unselfish service without hope of compensation, this is a matter of little interest or importance. To the seeker for wisdom and enlightenment and the initiate, it is of great interest, indicating as it does the role played by the masters of the secret schools in their desire to be of help to humanity. It will likewise reveal to them the meaning and goal of human evolution and development, and give them the unqualified assurance that such development is being aided by those who know now, as it has not been for many centuries. This work has now become possible because of a cycle of enlightenment, when the workers are unlikely to be sacrificed by an inquisition, although they may be persecuted for their beliefs or teachings. Such secret masters and initiates do exist, and they are truly possessed of profound knowledge. They are ready to help the denizens of the world, but these must be ready and willing to receive help if they are to be benefited by it. Guided by a complete philosophy armed with a key to symbolism, aided by the initiates and the secret schools, the lost mysteries may be restored and confer their benefits upon the races of men now so badly in need of the instructions and help these schools can confer. Mere vulgar curiosity and secrecy alone have never been and never will be the password to the adytum of true initiation. It necessitates something more than curiosity to find the gate of the path that leads to soul illumination, initiation. It requires a heart that throbs for the welfare of humanity and a love for equal opportunity and justice to all. He alone who seeks initiation because he desires help and thereby seeks to confer a benefit upon his fellow man can hope to reach the goal of attainment. A history of those who have become initiates would necessarily be tinged with a touch of pathos, on account of the many sorrowful disappointments it would record in the case of earnest souls seeking, with sincerity and in truth, for the lost word of the masters, the key that unlocks the magic wand of power and points the way to the soul and proofs of immortality, who, for their earnestness and sincerity and their loyalty to those who taught them, ultimately were publicly executed as malefactors and enemies of state or church, as most of them have been in the past. However, no one has sought the path to initiation in love and humility without having found entrance to the secret schools and proving faithful and loyal, reached the goal where they were brought face to face with the sublime mysteries, the knowledge that love leads to God, that both love and God are symbolized by the sacred, ever-burning fire. That same fire which Moses of old saw burning in the bush as he would have passed it, and from whence issued the voice which commanded him to be the savior of his race. That these secret schools and their masters should exist throughout all time and remain without a history seems at first a strange paradox. The enemies of the mysteries and sacred philosophy will urge this fact as a reason for rejecting all that is herein contained, ignorant of the fact that few histories of any people or any epoch are better founded. Foremost among these detractors or deniers will be found the bigoted sectarian and the modern materialist. With each of these, the real genius of the mysteries is in perpetual conflict. For the first, the equal rights and privilege of justice to all men is a dead letter, for he believes only he himself and his chosen associates can be saved. For the second, the materialist, the recognition of the divine principle in man and belief in the immortality of the soul will prove a stumbling block of equal terror. Fortunately, the number of bigoted sectarians and out-and-out materialists are few, but these few seemingly are in authority and able to persecute all those who may not be to their way of thinking. The historical deficiency referred to is by no means without a parallel. That superstructure known as Christianity has, it is true, many historical phases of dogmas the most contradictory, of doctrines promulgated in one age and enforced with vice-regal authority and severe penalties for denial and disbelief, only to be denied and repudiated as damnable heresy in another age. In the meantime, the origin of these doctrines and the personality of the man of sorrows around which these traditions cluster receives no adequate support from authentic history. Simply because there is no true history of the birth and life of Jesus to be had, or for the reason Orthodox Christianity has not been able to produce a history of those they make pretensions of following, but whom they have never really known, must we conclude that it is all a fable, that there was no Jesus of Nazareth, that the legend was put forth and kept alive by designing men, thereby to support their pretensions to authority. Are historical facts and personal biography alone entitled to credit? While everlasting principles, divine beneficence, and the laying down of one's life for another are of no account? Is that which has inspired the hope and brightened the lives of the downtrodden and despairing for ages a mere fancy, a designing lie? Tear every shred of history from the life of Jesus today and prove beyond controversy that he never existed, and humanity, from its heart of hearts, would create him again tomorrow and justify the creation by every need of the daily life of man. The historical contention might be given up, totally ignored, and the whole character, genius, and mission of Jesus, who became the Christ, be nonetheless real, beneficent, and eternal, with all of its human and dramatic episodes. Explain it as you will, it can never be explained away. The character remains, and whether historical or ideal, it is real and eternal. Christ is no myth. This digression serves to illustrate a principle of interpretation. The traditions and the symbols of mysticism and the philosophy of fire or the pathway to the soul do not derive their real value from historical data, but from the universal and eternal truths which they embody, and from the fact that all the teachings and symbolism of the secret schools are founded on the divine philosophy that the soul is a smaller edition of the Father, that this soul is manifested through fire in the form of love for one's fellow man, for truth, for the greatest good to all, and finally in the heart's desire to portray God. Love is the only bond that can bind man to man and all men to God. Were these representations historical episodes only, the world in its cyclic revolution would long since have swept by and buried them in eternal oblivion. They are facts, imparted by initiate to initiate in the secret schools from time immemorial, even as now. Such great truths, obscured and lost in one age by misinterpretation or persecution, rise, phoenix-like, rejuvenated in the next. We should not say lost. They are merely suppressed and held in the secret archives of the great school to be again promulgated when the time is opportune. They are immortal truths, knowing neither decay nor death. They are like divine images concealed in a block of stone, which many artists assail with mallet and chisel, square and compass, only perchance to release a distorted idol. Only the master workman, the initiate, can so chip away the stone as to reveal in all its grandeur and beauty the divine ideal, and endow it with the breath of life. Such is the builder of the soul. Ceremonial initiation can never make one either a master or an initiate. It requires a master teacher to accept man in his crude or materialistic state, and through instruction, training, and development lead him to initiation. And this can only be accomplished by a process of growth and a rigid system of training. No genuine mystic imbued with the spirit of liberality will treat any religion with derision or contempt, or will exclude from fellowship anyone who believes in the existence of God. The fight of free choice to all men and freedom of action, so long as such action does not interfere with others. This spirit is the foundation of mysticism, and any departure from it leads away from the path of wisdom and directly opposite to the fundamental thought of the AA. The secret schools have for ages held aloft the torchlight of toleration, equity, and fraternity. The bigoted sectarian, whoever he may be, divides the world into two classes: those who with zeal and blind faith accept his dogmas and those who do not. The first he calls brother, and the second class he regards as enemies who must be persecuted. The secret schools, it is true, demand obedience to laws and instructions from all those who desire to travel the path. But these schools do not, and never did, attempt to force upon outsiders any of their beliefs or philosophies. The distinction between the esoteric and the exoteric doctrines was always, even from the very earliest times, preserved among the initiates. It came from the Egyptian school up to the time of Alexander, and after that they resorted for instructions and the mysteries to other schools, namely to those of Asia as well as those of ancient Thrace, Sicily, Etruria, and other countries. The more profound secrets of the mysteries cannot be revealed or taught by means of ceremonial initiation. They belong only to those few who are willing to live the life and thereby grow into knowledge conferred by such living. To experience is to know. To be taught is merely to believe and nothing more. These secrets must be sought by the individual. The neophyte is debarred from possessing them solely by his own inattention to the hints everywhere given by the initiates of the secret schools, such as the Magi, the Rose Cross, the alchemists, and those of Ulyss. If one prefers to treat the whole subject with contempt, to deny that any such real knowledge exists, it becomes evident that he not only closes the door against the possibility of himself possessing such knowledge, but even becomes impervious to any evidence of its existence that might come to him. He has no one but himself to blame if he is left in darkness. Seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you. Such has ever been the divine command, so long as the struggle for bare existence involves, as it does today, the greater part of the energy, time, and opportunities of man. He may never discover the real meaning of life or the purpose of human existence. Even this much may be discerned from physical evolution alone, from the study of the human brain, in which there is a continually increasing portion of gray substance set free from the functions incident to the preservation of the physical structure, and evidently designed to be appropriated to separate and higher use. Mere intellectual activities alone, connected with the physical plane, with the maintenance and enjoyment of life, will not explain the philosophy of cerebral development. It is only when man divides his day of 24 hours into 3 equal parts, 1/3 for labor wherewith to obtain the necessities of life, 1/3 for rest, and the other third for recreation, self-improvement, and the awakening of his higher self, that he will become the balanced being God, his creator, had intended he should be. This is the rational and natural doctrine taught by the initiates and instructors in the secret schools. There are latent powers and almost infinite capabilities in man, the meaning of which he has hardly dreamed of possessing. Nor will leisure and intellectual cultivation alone reveal these powers. It is only through a complete balanced philosophy of the entire nature of man and the capacities and destiny of the human soul, supplemented by the use of such knowledge, that man will eventually come into possession of his birthright and begin the journey to perfection. It is such a path the initiates would lead man to follow, knowing as they do from long experience, it is the only one that leads to the goal of rejuvenation of the entire being called man. 2 conditions at the present moment stand squarely in the way of such achievement. First, anarchy and confusion, a non-belief in law and order, the result of selfishness in social relations. This plight can be overcome in but one way, viz. The recognition of the unqualified equal rights of all men to seek knowledge and wisdom in their own way, not as a theory, a religious duty, or a mere matter of sentiment, but as a fact in nature, a universal and divine law, the penalty for the violation of which is precisely the conditions under which humanity now struggles and suffers. The second condition, which has given rise to confusion among the workmen in building the social temple and the individual habitation of man, are false ideals, inefficient methods of education, and almost total ignorance of the finer forces, potentialities, and soul fire possessed by man until these divine inheritances are well-nigh starved to death, and only the physical and intellectual part of man survives. The result of this ignorance may be seen in the fact that hardly one individual in a million who has both leisure and opportunity attains real advancement in the evolution of the higher powers possessed. Nor is he cognizant of the fact that he may become a living soul with all that such possession might mean to him. This ought not to be so, nor need it be, if earnest men and women would seek diligently, first for the cause of all our ills, and second for an efficient remedy. This remedy is found first in knowledge, second in obedience to creative laws. If real knowledge and the nature of the soul and the destiny of man had never existed, our present status would be pitiable in the extreme. But when we demonstrate that this knowledge always existed, at times only in the secret archives of the great school, that it became degraded by selfishness and then suppressed by design, that for centuries designing priests, many of whom would have disgraced a scaffold but have been canonized as saints, have done their utmost to deprive humanity of this knowledge, what shall humanity say? Shall mankind preach the equal rights of all men, toleration to all beliefs, and yet seek revenge on the priesthood? 1,000 times no, but rather leave priests and proletariat to settle their own affairs and go their own way. And let us go to work ourselves to establish the ancient schools wherein all those who seek may be taught the way of life. Knowing these things as we do, can we condemn the arch-fraternities who have for a time hidden this knowledge, so saving it for future races? Should we not rather be thankful to them for keeping it in its virgin purity? In all our popular present religious instructions, beginning with childhood, and through all the ministrations of religion thereafter, we are taught to look very sharply after the salvation of our souls. And this in the face of the statement that a very large proportion of the human race will eventually be utterly lost or damned for all eternity. Science forms another picture by trying to demonstrate that the struggle for existence is a necessary condition for improvement in every department of man's nature, pointing out that all the great leaders of the past were indefatigable workers, while the laggard fell prey to the strong, which is undoubtedly true but does not go far enough, dealing only with the physical man, forgetful of the spiritual counterpart. To the scientist, self-preservation at the expense of others of the human family is regarded as the first law of life. What is the result? The world is chaotic, man is against man, the spiritual life of all nations is at its lowest ebb, faith in law and order at a minimum, confidence in neither legislator, physician, or minister. Until we can bring man to an understanding that he is a complex, combined being, pointing out to him that he must develop the inner, the spiritual being, in harmony with the external man, this chaos will continue to increase until revolution, which turns man against man in blood, shall cast the pall of night over humanity. Is it not reasonable to suppose that if humanity generally were possessed of real knowledge, it might govern their actions, so shaping their lives as to avoid the pitfalls of ignorance and set its feet on the line of a higher race development? Religion, that of the soul, which comes from the heart rather than the head, offers faith, and through faith all things become possible. This is the science religion of the initiates, and the basis of the secret schools. There is but one source of real knowledge, namely self-awakening, development, and enlightenment through the mystic philosophy. The doctrine of equal rights and opportunity to all men must be and is the only basis of true ethics. And the great republic, which is jealous of the rights of every man, great or small, is the ideal state. If these concepts were accepted and acted upon, there would result time, opportunity, and the power to apprehend the deeper and higher problems of the origin, nature, and destiny of man. Man is not man as yet, and will not be until he has sought and found his soul, that living fire which allies him with the Creator of all mankind, namely God the Father of all, the high and the low, the wise and the ignorant, and who would have the ignorant to become wise, the weak like the strong, the low equal to the greatest. What man may become, or what he might accomplish under favorable conditions, is seldom dreamed of by humanity, and is only visualized for us by the lives of the great masters of the past. There is widespread and increasing conviction that true education, that which deals with the whole man, would prove a panacea for all our evils, and that if we could begin with the training of the children, we could eventually reform society. That even the children of vicious parentage might be transformed from criminals in embryo to useful citizens in whom no longer lingered any trace of the desire to commit crime or disobey law. Such a system of education would not merely include the branches at present taught in our schools and colleges, but would likewise include a harmonious physical training, a method of mental development and thorough instruction in constructive sex science. The Humanitarian Society was founded for the express purpose of imparting instruction in intersex laws, higher race development, dietetics for health and strength, and mental development for constructive purposes. The demand for a real higher inner education and training is becoming insistent. Such an education would necessarily mean the bringing out of the highest in man. It would be a fourfold and rational development of the entire being. Only by teaching the truth, not as supposed to be by materialist or theological educators, but as the soul, the higher self in man teaches man what is right, will the race be elevated. Selfishness or material gain only is the keynote of the present-day educational system. Hence it has miserably failed and established caste and class distinction. Nothing so shrouds the higher self, the real in man, in darkness and misconception as selfishness. This is the primary cause of the universal mistrust and hatred between classes and races. It should be toward this higher knowledge, once termed the ancient mysteries, which all useful and rational acquirement tend. And why should our efforts cease short of the very highest? All education that does not follow this direction with the final goal consistently and continually in view is false and is necessarily a failure. If this were not actually true, would individuals and nations be heading toward chaos as they now are? Certainly established systems of education and training have had a fair trial, and what has been the result? Mistrust of each other, anarchy, socialism and disloyalty to the established government, condemnation of creeds and churchism, disbelief in medical science, and mistrust of the courts of justice, together with an almost universal sex degradation and millions of bodies staggering under the load of diseases, the result of vice. This higher education, this ancient wisdom, is a knowledge of the powers and requirements of the physical being, an understanding of the soul, of its origin, nature, potentialities, and the laws that govern its evolution and development. And this is precisely the knowledge which modern science fails to afford, but which the ancient science and the secret schools have taught in the mysteries, and is open today to all who truly seek. All preliminary study and training lead up to this, the real measure of a man. Just as all life should be constant evolution, so much all real knowledge or philosophy be an initiation, proceeding in a natural order, advancing by specific degrees of growth and unfoldment. These degrees are materialized to some extent in the modern Masonic fraternity, an order which has much of the material and hidden mysteries of antiquity, but which has lost the key except in a few rare instances. In the true initiation, that of gradual growth and becoming, the candidate or neophyte must always be worthy and well qualified, duly and truly prepared. That is, he must perceive that such knowledge exists, must desire to possess it, be willing to make every effort and whatever personal sacrifice is necessary for its acquisition. He must have passed beyond the stage of blind belief or superstition, the bondage of fear, the age of fable, and the dominion of appetite and sense desires. This is the meaning of being duly and truly prepared. He must prove his fitness in these directions, no less than show the absence in himself of that subtler form of intellectual selfishness which comes from the possession of what usually passes as knowledge, and from the desire for dominion through it over others, less highly endowed for selfish purposes of his own. His motives, therefore, alone will determine that he is worthy and well qualified. It is undoubtedly true that on every plane of life, in the process by which knowledge is acquired, always by experience, man becomes that which he seeks to know. That is, knowing is a progressive becoming through experience. There results, therefore, a continuous transformation or transmutation of the motives, ideals, and perceptions of the individuality. Whenever in his daily experience in life he is placed on the lines of least resistance or the natural order of evolution. This is the science and philosophical meaning of true initiation, as taught by the secret schools, and is termed the alchemical process of transforming or transmutation the lesser into the greater. The secret school, order of the AA, is devoting its every effort to teach its neophyte this fourfold development and alchemical transmutation. Though generally unknown, it upholds the sacredness of religion and the family circle, loyalty to the government, and inculcates faith and trust in medicine, law, and order. There is at the present moment so much of the commonplace which passes as knowledge and is accepted as such by the worthy, though unthinking student, which is so utterly void of comprehension that unless a person is familiar with this line of thought, he would not really be able to see the truth and the bearing of the statement that man always becomes that which he really attempts to live and practice. This is the fundamental reason why the mere inculcation of moral precepts so often fails entirely in transforming character, and why there is so much lip service and so little actual service one for the other. When men once comprehend this, they will understand the mystery of alchemy, the transformation or transmutation of baser metals into the pure and shining gold. Once they comprehend, once the conscience has become awakened and they have learned to know, they will begin to become. For in the process of doing will they commence to know and thus become. Conscience is the struggle of the understanding in assimilating experience. It is the effort of the individual to adjust precept with practice. Or in other words, conscience is that living, active something which acts as an incentive to do, thus helping the growth of the soul and the increase of man's power to apprehend the truth and to apply it in everyday life. Thus, while man is learning, if he also lives, he is actually growing or transmuting, and the process will be far advanced ere he is aware of any great growth made. In the ancient mysteries, life presented itself to the candidate or neophyte as a problem to be solved, and not merely as certain propositions to be memorized and then forgotten. The solution of the problem constituted all genuine initiation, and at every step or degree expanded. Therefore, man, know thyself was written above the door of every temple wherein were taught the ancient mysteries and initiation accomplished. As the vision of the neophyte enlarged in relation to the labors and meaning of life, his power of apprehension and assimilation also increased proportionately. This was likewise an evolution. The lower degrees of such initiation concerned the ordinary affairs of life, namely a knowledge of the laws and processes of external nature, the neophyte's relation to these through his physical body, and his relations on the physical plane through his animal senses and social instincts to his family and his fellow men. These things being learned through experience and development, not merely memorized, the neophyte passes on to the next degree. Here he learns the nature of his soul and the process of its development, and begins to unfold those finer instincts which have been so often referred to in books dealing with initiation. If he is found capable of understanding these and keeps his vow in the preceding degrees, he presently discovers the evolution within him of senses and faculties pertaining to the soul plane. His progress would be instantly arrested, and his teachers refuse him all further instructions if he were found negligent of the ordinary duties of life, those to his family, his neighbors, or his country. All these duties must be fully discharged before he can stand upon the threshold of the greater mysteries, because in these he becomes to be an unselfish servant to humanity as a whole, and there is no longer the right to bestow the gifts of knowledge or power that he possesses upon his own kinsmen or friends, in preference to others who might more justly claim these through the law of greater necessity. In the higher degrees, he may even be precluded from using his powers to preserve his own life or protect his own property. Both the initiate and his powers belong to humanity. If the reader will but consider how those who crucified Jesus called upon him in mockery to save himself and to come down from the cross. If he were the Christ, it may be readily understood that this doctrine of supreme unselfishness ought long ago to have been apprehended by the Christian world. For while it is a divine attribute, the synonym of the Christ, it is latent in all humanity and must be evolved in all if it is to be of service to a greater humanity, though it must not be understood for a moment that the initiate gives to all alike, whether worthy or unworthy, because in giving to the unworthy or those who can help themselves, he would merely weaken them instead of strengthening them, even to curse. That which seems to make such an evolution impossible is that it cannot be conceived as being accomplishable in a single life, nor can it be. It is the result of persistent effort guided by high ideals through many lives. Those who deny pre-existence may logically deny all such evolution. There must, however, come a time when the consummation is reached in one life. This may be in our present life. This is the logical meaning of the saying of Jesus, "It is finished." Today, many of those who have not the honor to belong to any of the secret fraternities know there were both an exoteric and an esoteric doctrine with the early Christians, that the esoteric doctrines were communicated orally in the mysteries of initiation, and that these mysteries conformed to and were originally derived from those of the so-called pagan world. The mysteries of the Christ received a new interpretation after the First Nicene Council, and as the Church sought dominion, it lost the great secret. Since then it has denied that it ever existed, and has done all in its power to obliterate all its records and monuments. History, both sacred and profane, proves this. Tertullian, who died about AD 216, says in his Apology, "None are admitted to the religious mysteries without an oath of secrecy. We appeal to your Thracian and Eleusinian mysteries, and we are specially bound to this caution, because if we prove faithless, we should not only provoke heaven, but draw upon our heads the utmost rigor of human displeasure." Many students of the mysteries have had the mistaken idea that the masters or initiates in the secret schools draw a curse upon those students who break their vow, having been led to this belief because sorrow, suffering, and ultimate misfortune always follows such broken vows. Neither master, initiate, or teacher ever pronounces a curse. On the contrary, the student, through the law he himself sets in motion when he takes the vow, brings upon himself sorrow, misery, suffering, and misfortune if he proves disloyal. A vow is like a boomerang. If thrown straight, will continue forward, but when misdirected, will return and destroy the one responsible. Archelaus, bishop of Cascara in Mesopotamia, the year 278, said, "These mysteries the Church now communicates to him who has passed through the introductory degree. These are not explained to the Gentiles at all, nor are they taught in the hearing of the catechumens. But much that is spoken is in disguised terms, that the faithful who possess the knowledge may be still more informed, and those who are not acquainted with it may suffer no disadvantage." The Council of Nice had not taken the secret schools and occult fraternities into consideration, nor did they know much concerning them. The Council had knowledge such schools and orders existed, but were under the mistaken impression they were only for the purpose of pagan initiations, had no knowledge of the fact that these secret schools and orders possessed records to be handed down from initiate to initiate for all time to come, that the keys to the sacred mysteries could never be lost to the secret schools and occult orders. Saint Basil, the great bishop of Caesarea, says, "We receive the dogmas transmitted to us by writing, and those which have descended to us from the apostles and beneath the mystery of oral tradition. For several things have been handed to us without writing, lest the vulgar, too familiar with our dogmas, should lose a due respect for them. This is why the uninitiated are not permitted to contemplate. And how should it ever be proper to write and circulate among the people an account of them?" Those who composed the Council of Nice undoubtedly knew of the claims made by certain priests of the day that the secret mysteries were in possession of certain secret school. But considering these assertions as being voiced by madmen and fanatics, little or no attention was paid to them. This sublime philosophy, inclusive of the sacred mysteries once taught in the greater mysteries of Egypt, India, Chaldea, Asia, and Persia, likewise among many other nations of antiquity, is known neither to modern churchianity nor to any of the exoteric orders, any more than it was known to the Council of Nice. In the year 525 BC, Cambyses, called the Mad, led an army into Egypt, overran the country, destroyed its cities, palaces, and temples, scattered its priest initiates, all priests of the temple were initiates and instructors to the neophytes, and reduced the country to a Persian province. Many of the priests took refuge in Greece and conveyed thither the Egyptian mysteries, the same mysteries Pythagoras had journeyed to Egypt to obtain half a century earlier. At the beginning of the Christian era, the mysteries were known only to the initiates and priests. The masses were in ignorance as to their very existence. There remained at the time the Essenian order, as well as the Gnostics, the latter an inner circle of the Essenes. The Therapeutae of Alexandria was merely another name for a branch of the Essenian fraternity. Today, the order of men then known as the Essenes is termed the Rosy Cross. There never has been the slightest interruption of this secret fraternity. It has many times changed its name since its foundation, but its instructions remain the same. Thus, from these orders were derived the Christian mysteries, preserved in the secret archives of the great schools, known only to initiates of the higher degrees. The Neoplatonists, headed by Ammonius Saccas, undertook to preserve the primitive relation, and the utterances of the Christian bishops to which reference has been made show how the secret doctrine was adopted from the earlier mysteries by the primitive Christians during the first 3 centuries of our era. After the First Council of Nice AD 325, which was presided over by none others than exoteric or form Christians, looking for power and authority, little more was heard of the earlier doctrines. And with the burning of the great library of Alexandria, church supremacy and the Dark Ages obliterated the primitive wisdom of Western Europe, so far as the masses were concerned, as it was overrun by hordes of barbarians from the north. The principal seats of learning were the convents and monasteries. Coming now to the dawn of the 16th century and the great Protestant and Rosicrucian reformations, we find Johann Trithemius, abbot of St. Jacob at Würzburg, celebrated as one of the greatest alchemists and adepts. Cornelius Agrippus and Paracelsus were his pupils. We must not forget Christian Rosenkreutz, the refounder of the Rosicrucian fraternity, which had previously been known as the Alchemists and Paracelsians, and the powerful influence his works had on the Reformation of the time. John Reuchlin, a famous Kabbalist of the time and counted as one of the most learned men of his day in Europe, was the friend and preceptor of Luther. And Luther's first public utterances were a course of lectures on the philosophy of Aristotle. What effect the Rosicrucian Reformation had on Luther can only be judged from the fact that the private seal used by Luther was the rose and the cross, then a purely Rosicrucian symbol. Great effort was made to revive the ancient wisdom among those outside of the secret schools of the fraternity. But the age was too gross and superstitious, and the Reformation resulted in centuries of blind belief, likewise in the suppression of the secret doctrine as far as this could be accomplished. However, the Universal Reformation had accomplished one of its purposes. It had drawn to itself those who were truly ready to receive the inner training and the mysteries of the great fraternity. The sincere student should always remember the important fact that in the secret school there has always been and ever will be an exoteric portion given out to the world, to the uninitiated, and an esoteric doctrine reserved for the initiate, revealed by gradual degrees according as the neophyte demonstrates his fitness to receive, conceal, and rightly use the knowledge imparted to him. The great schools, whether Rosicrucian, Magian, or select priesthood, recognize the whole world as one republic, of which each nation is a family and every individual a child of the family. This relationship, not in any wise derogating from the differing duties which the diversity of states requires, tends to create a new people which, composed of many nations and tongues, shall be bound together by the bonds of a true universal science, believe in the equal rights of all men, to development, advancement, religious freedom, and justice. Therefore, one of the real objects of these orders, whether mystic masonry or any other mystic or occult fraternity, may be summed up in the following: to efface from among men the prejudices of caste, the conventional distinctions of color, origin, opinion, nationality, to annihilate fanaticism and superstition, to extirpate national discord and with it to extinguish the firebrand of war. In a word, to arrive by free and pacific progress at one formula or model of universal right. according to which each individual human being shall be free to develop every faculty with which he may be endowed, and to concur heartily and with all the fullness of his strength in the bestowment of happiness upon all, and thus to make of the whole human race one family of brothers, united by love, wisdom, and science. That this may be accomplished, a true and constructive philosophy must be taught. Avarice as to possessions must be eliminated from the human heart through an understanding of law, having all come to comprehension that the desire for possessions which bring pleasure is legitimate, but that one should not covet the possessions of others, though like possessions may be desired. True science and religion must be wedded, and the key to both science and religion or philosophy must be love, one for the other. Such a philosophy has always been the foundation of the secret schools and of the Rose Cross. The essential form or idea of all things, the potency or force and matter as we now discern it, existed in primordial space. Therefore these two always exist, namely the inner potency and the outer act. The concealed idea and the outer form, the inner meaning and the outer event, each in turn a symbol of the other. Hence the saying on the Smaragdine table of Hermes, as above so below. All outward things are therefore symbols or embodiments of pre-existing ideas, and out of this subjective ideal realm all visible things have emanated. This doctrine of emanations is the key to the philosophy of the Gnostic and Essene sects, from which the early Christians derived their mysteries and whence the secret schools have their foundation. The fundamental doctrine of the secret schools may be briefly stated thus: there is a grand science generally known as magic because little understood by the masses. Every real initiate of any order must be a magus. Feared by the ignorant and often ridiculed by the supposedly learned, the divine science and its masters have nevertheless existed in all ages and do today as surely as the fraternities in which they are the masters. Occultism in its deeper meaning and recondite mysteries constitutes and possesses this science, and all genuine initiation consists in an unfolding of the natural powers of the neophyte, so that he shall become that which he desires to possess. In seeking magic, he finally becomes the magus. All genuine initiation is like evolution and regeneration from within. Devoid of this inner meaning and power, all rituals and ceremonial initiations are but foolish jargon and without meaning to the initiated. That the Christ life and power which made Jesus to be called Christos Master, whereby he healed the sick, cast out devils, and foretold future events, is the same life revealed by initiation in the secret schools, is perfectly plain. The disrepute into which the mysteries have fallen has arisen from their abuse and degradation by those who broke their vows and proved false to the instructions they had received. Undoubtedly, there are dangers met with in symbolism and mysticism, which afford an impressive lesson regarding similar risks attendant on the use of any other secret force. The imagination called in to assist the reason may usurp its place, or leaves its ally helplessly entangled in its web. Names which stand for things are confounded with them. The means are mistaken for the end, the instrument of interpretation for the object. And thus symbols come to usurp an independent character as truths and persons. Though perhaps a necessary path, they are dangerous ones to approach the deity, in which many, says Plutarch, mistaking the sign for the thing signified, fell into a ridiculous superstition, while others, in avoiding one extreme, plunged into the no less hideous gulf of irreligion and impiety. It is through the mysteries, said Cicero, that we have learned the first principles of life, wherefore the term initiation is used with good reason. The employment of nature's universal symbolism instead of the technicalities of language rewards the humblest inquirer and discloses its secrets to everyone in proportion to his preparatory training to comprehend them. If their philosophical significance was above the comprehension of some, their moral and political meaning are within the reach of all. In every age there have been dabblers in the mysteries, as there are at the present time sorcerers and necromancers, who, possessing some few of the secrets and imbued with none of its beneficence, have used this knowledge and power for purely personal and selfish ends, thereby ultimately destroying themselves. Hypnotism is one illustration of the power referred to, mighty in its power for good, especially in the correction of destructive habits when employed by one morally clean but vastly destructive in the hands of one without principle. Magic per se is always an absolute science, and up to a certain point it may be cultivated without regard to its use and for the well-being of man, although any abuse of it will prove fatal to the magus sooner or later. And the black magician, he who uses his forces for selfish purposes, will eventually destroy himself. The popular idea is that education consists in the cultivation of the intellect. An average standard of morals is always recommended by educators, and its outer form is illustrated by religious ceremonies. But intellectual cultivation alone, no matter to what extent it may be carried, and the further it goes on in this one-sided way, the worse for all concerned, is in no sense an evolution, as such one-sided education is the cause of our present-day bigotism, an intolerance of the opinions represented and expressed by the few who are always considered as unorthodox. Perfect intellectual development without spiritual discernment and moral obligation is the sign manual of Satan. Intelligence without goodness lies athwart the divine plan in the evolution of humanity. Intellect and altruism by no means necessarily go hand in hand. One may have a very clear intellect, have quick perception and be a good reasoner and yet be a conscienceless scoundrel. On the contrary, one may be dull intellectually and yet be kind, brotherly and sympathetic to the highest degree. A world made up of the former would be a bad place to live in, of the latter 1,000 times to be preferred. Magic, in its true meaning, contemplates that all-around development of the entire man, which, liberating the intellect from the dominion of the senses and illuminating the spiritual perceptions, places the individual on the lines of least resistance with the inflexible laws of nature, and the magus becomes nature's co-worker or handmaid. To all such, nature makes obeisance and delegates her powers, and they become masters. The real master conceals his power and employs it only for the good of others. He works without the hope of reward, knowing that God is just. Believing that knowledge is power, designing and evil-minded men desire to possess both knowledge and power for entirely selfish purposes. It may be readily understood that the greater the possession of power a purely selfish man has, the more inimical to humanity he becomes. This is especially true in the case with the deeper sciences which deal with mental forces and which influence the thoughts and actions of others. Modern science, purely materialistic in its aims and conclusions, has always ridiculed the idea embodied in magic, for materialism can never recognize the spiritual forces. The traditional lost word of the master is a key to all the science of the soul. Term this science magic or what we will, but it must be remembered that the so-called lost word is not a word, but refers to a force, power, or energy, resulting from careful training and spiritual development. The wisdom of the initiate is not empirical. It does not consist of a few isolated formulas by which certain startling or unusual effects can be produced. Formulas have little to do with this knowledge. The magus has found and knows his own soul. He has purified the heart so that it throbs with love for humanity, and through the reawakening of instinct and intuition, he holds the key to many of nature's laws, whereby he is enabled to accomplish his desires. He does not work contrary to natural laws, but in harmony with them. The Magi's art is therefore based on a science far deeper and more exact than modern physical science has yet dreamed of. And back of it lies a philosophy as boundless as the universe, as inexhaustible as time, and as beneficent as the Father in heaven. Such initiates have always existed, and no book or record worth preserving or in any way necessary for the good of man is ever lost. In the secret crypts, alike inaccessible to the uninitiated man and to the corrosion of time and decay, these records are well preserved and can only be made use of by those who are truly prepared and are fit to make use of their teachings for the greatest good of the many. All human progress runs in cycles. Modern materialistic science has had its brief day and must gradually take its rightful place. True philosophy has already undermined its foundation. The new age will show a genuine revival of philosophy and true science. The immortal principles enunciated by the philosophers, clothed in modern garb of thought, less involved and dialectical, again commands the attention of the thinking world. Everyone is aware that the source of the old philosophers' knowledge was the mysteries. They were initiates, and on almost every page reveal the obligation they were under not to betray to the profane, the uninitiated, the secrets taught only to initiates under the pledge of secrecy. There is in nature one most potent force by means of which a single person who would possess himself of it and know how to direct it could revolutionize and change the whole face of the world. This force was known to the ancients, and the secret is possessed by the secret schools of the present day. It is a universal agent whose supreme law is equilibrium, and whereby, if science can but learn how to control it, will be possible to send a thought in an instant around the world, to heal or slay at a distance, to give our words universal success, and to make them reverberate everywhere. There is a life principle, a universal agent wherein are two natures and a double current of love and wrath. This ambient fluid pervades everything. It is a ray detached from the glory of the sun and fixed by the weight of the atmosphere and the central attraction. It is the body of the Holy Spirit, the universal agent, the serpent devouring its own tail, symbol at once of continued youth and immortality of the soul, plus unlimited power. With this electromagnetic ether, this vital and luminous caloric, developable in everyone, the ancients and the alchemists were familiar. Of this agent, that phase of modern ignorance termed physical science talks incoherently, knowing nothing of it save its effects, and theology might apply to it all its pretended definitions of spirit and still be unable to define it. Quiescent, it is appreciable by no human sense. Disturbed or in movement, none can explain its mode of action except the initiate, and to term it a fluid and to speak of its currents is but to veil a profound mystery under a cloud of words. The Bible, with all the allegories it contains, expresses in a veiled and incomplete manner only the religious science of the Hebrews. The doctrines of Moses and the prophets, identical at bottom with that of the ancient Egyptians, also had its outer meaning and its mysteries hidden behind a veil. The Hebrew books were written only to recall to memory the traditions, and they were written in symbols unintelligible to the profane. The Pentateuch and the prophetic poems were merely elementary books of doctrines, morals, or liturgy, and the true secret and traditional philosophy was only written afterwards, under a veil still less transparent. This was a second Bible born, unknown to, or rather uncomprehended by, the Christians of latter times, a collection, they say, of monstrous absurdities, a monument, the initiates say, wherein is to be found everything that the genius of philosophy and of religion have ever formed or imagined of the sublime, a treasure surrounded by thorns, a diamond concealed in a rough, dark stone. The Kabbalah then alone consecrates the alliance of the universal reason and divine word. It establishes by the counterpoise of two forces apparently opposite the eternal balance of being. It alone reconciles reason with faith, and power with liberty, science with mystery. It has the keys of the present, past, and the future. One is filled with admiration on penetrating into the sanctuary of the Kabbalah, at seeing a doctrine so logical, so simple, and at the same time so absolute. The necessary union of ideas and signs, the consecration of the most fundamental realities by the primitive characters, the trinity of words, letters and numbers, a philosophy simple as the alphabet, profound and infinite as the world. Theorems more complete and luminous than those of Pythagoras, a theology summed up by counting on one's fingers, an infinite which can be held in the hollow of an infant's hand, 10 ciphers and 22 letters, a triangle, a square and a circle. These are all the elements of the Kabbalah. These are the elementary principles of the written word, reflection of that spoken word which created the world. Life may be represented by a triangle at the apex of which is God. Of this triangle, the two sides are formed by two streams, the one flowing outwards, the other upwards. The base may be taken to represent the material plane. Thus, from God proceed the gods. From the gods proceed all the hierarchy of heaven with the various orders from the highest to the lowest. Here again we have the doctrine of Hermes, the Kabbalah of the ancient Hebrews, which Moses derived by initiation into the mysteries of Egypt and Persia, was identical among the Hebrews, the Egyptians, the Hindus, and other nations of antiquity, and known as the grand science or secret doctrine. Initiation is knowledge unfolded by degrees in an orderly, systematic process, step by step, as the capacity to apprehend grows and opens in the neophyte. The result is not a possession, but a growth, an evolution, plus development. Knowledge is not a mere sum in addition, something added to something that already exists, but rather such a progressive change or transformation of the original material man to make of him at every step a new being. Real knowledge, or the growth of wisdom in man, is an eternal becoming, a progressive transformation of the crude and material into the likeness of the supreme goodness and supreme power. The sacred books of all religions, including those of the Jews and the Christians, were and still remain more than parables and allegories of the secret doctrines, transcribed for those who will live the life so as to comprehend the inner mystery. All commentaries written on these sacred books, whether on those of Moses, the Psalms and the prophets of Judaism, the Gospels of the Gnostics and Christians, or those written on the sacred books of the East, the Vedas, Puranas, and Upanishads, either make confusion more confounded when written by one ignorant of the secret doctrine, or when written by initiates but further elaborate the parables and allegories, plus applying them to ordinary life. It is easily demonstrable that the secret doctrine was the primitive wisdom religion. Its earliest records are to be found in Asia, Egypt, and India, and thence have been carried to other countries. Underlying this secret doctrine is a profound philosophy of the creation or evolution of worlds and of man. The present humanity in many quarters of the globe has evolved on the intellectual plan so far that there now exists a very large number of persons capable of apprehending this old philosophy, and at the same time capable of understanding the responsibility incurred in misusing or misinterpreting it. A large number of people have reached, on the intellectual plane, the state of manhood, making them capable of partaking of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. There is, therefore, no reason why this old philosophy should be longer concealed. On the contrary, there are many reasons why it should be given to those who are ready to receive it. Empirical knowledge has advanced in certain directions into the realm of psychism and the arts anciently designated by the term magic. And it is imperative that the dangers which attend these pursuits should be pointed out and demonstrated, whereby they may be avoided by the beneficent, and that the ignorant or innocent may be afforded protection. How far these modern inroads into occultism or ancient magic extended very few persons seem to realize. It is therefore high time that the philosophy of the East should illumine the science of the West, and thus give the death blow to that intellectual diabolism and spiritual nihilism, known as materialism on the one hand, and spiritism on the other, and this a comprehension of the secret doctrine only can accomplish. Grave responsibility, however, is incurred by such a revelation. Those who, like the professional hypnotist and the spiritist, have sinned, perhaps ignorantly, and thus have been unconsciously black magicians, will eventually find no avenue from escape. As I am preparing the above, I receive a clipping entitled "The Mystic Side of the Bacillus Theory," published in one of the leading medical journals, the Alkaloidal Clinic, and prepared by the master of both medicine and the secret science, James R. Phelps, MD, Serum Therapy, having become an accepted therapeutic agent in treatment of diseases by representatives of the recognized medical schools. I think it well to reproduce the article because it will show we are reaching a plane of existence where true knowledge is demanded. The man who has the temerity to question or even discuss in a questioning way the generally accepted basic principles which underlie his profession is apt to find himself set down a heretic and invites the sneers and innuendos, if not crucifixion, of those who accept the deductions of scientists and deny the right of speech to anyone who dares to be wise above what is written. Not that it follows by any means that the heretic is necessarily right, any more than it follows that the human scientist is always right. For science has a large rubbish heap in its backyard, on which may be found many a discarded plank that once formed part of its infallible platform. A scientist once told me that a drop of nitric acid applied to a piece of freshly broken granite revealed, under the microscope, numerous living things similar to animalculae found in stagnant water. This, he asserted, proves that the solid rock is full of life. I fail to see that it proves any such thing. It simply shows that the action of the acid produced a form of motion there. And wherever there is motion, there is a magnetic current, and forms having life spring into existence. Not that they were any more in the rock than in the acid, or that necessarily they were in either. After all, is there not as much mystery about the manifestation of life in matter as there is about thought action? Things become perceptible to us when they come within the range of the senses, but have they no form of existence before they come into this plane, or do things spring from nothing? It has become the fashion, when there is a diseased bodily condition, to go on a hunt for the bacillus, which is one of the manifestations of that condition. I have nothing to say against this proceeding, but it is a mistake to allow this research to close up every other avenue of investigation and to assume offhand that the bacillus is the creator of the disease, rather than its creation. And there are many of our profession who are thinking along this same line. If we read of the cures effected by the Divine Master, call him the Nazarene if you please, names are immaterial, we find his cures almost invariably prefixed by the words, "Thy sins be forgiven thee." And this declaration was always an offense to the Pharisaical beholder. They could recognize the fact that a paralytic had been strangely healed, a leper cleansed, when the paralyzed man walked off with his bed on his back, or the hue of health came back to the pallid, ulcerated countenance of the leper. But the word of power that reached beyond their vision and changed the mental condition that produced the disease was too much for their comprehension. Let me quote from a writer on mystical subjects. "Disease does not enter in any manner from without. That which is external simply awakens that which is already within us. Disease is not an entity. It is simply a depolarization. That sights and sounds lure the imagination into activity, I claim. And in this faculty of the mind, depolarization of the spirit's action takes place, which causes a sudden condensation of spirit in some parts of the system to the damage of other parts left destitute. Thus, the system is all thrown out of harmony because the normal action of spirit is disturbed. Polarize the system, establish equilibrium, and a cure quickly results." The basis of the doctrine on health and disease taught by the secret schools of today, also the reason for some of their wonderful cures without the use of drugs of serums, though it must not be understood these schools condemn the employment of medicine in the treatment of disease. Some of the most successful physicians in the world belong to these schools. Now, belief being the fundamental principle of power, and man being more physical than mental, his belief is more readily aroused and sustained by physical substances than by ideas. Hence, the Magi used charms, amulets, and talismans to inspire the belief of the ignorant and material and produced many cures. Furthermore, who can doubt for a moment that drugs, metals, vegetable substances, etc., have a peculiar affinity for or are antipathetic to that department of the spiritual nature which we call the imagination? All action is dual, direct, and reflex. If material substances act on and create mental conditions, which I do not deny, then mental conditions act on and create material things. Known in the secret schools as image formation, visualization, and projection, and taught as part of the higher mysteries. The impure, diseased imagination, finding in the physical organism soil suitable for the purpose, impregnates it and generates bacilli. To deny this hypothesis does not disprove it. The bacteriologist with his microscope discovers bacilli and assumes that they are self-created or produced by material chemical action on the physical atoms. This may answer as explanation of maggots in rotten cheese. But the house of an immortal thing, which we call soul or spirit, is something different. There is no motion of muscles, tendon, or ligament that is not started first by mental action and will through not by the brain. And there is not a bacillus or microbe infesting the blood or tissues that did not have a definite positive existence before it became manifested to the microscope. And if we understand the working of the mind as well as we do the anatomy of the body, and there are many facts regarding this even that we are totally ignorant of, we might get more control over disease than we now seem to possess. And even with this influence over the mind, what do we do when an epidemic of cholera breaks out? We set people to cleaning out their backyards, disposing of rubbish, and more important still, we try to teach them to keep themselves clean. And this occupation tends to produce a temporary, at least, condition of mental cleanliness. Washing the outside of cup and platter is something in the way of removing filth, and it is an accomplishment of some moment to teach some men the religion of a clean shirt. Mental uncleanliness is apt to generate bodily uncleanliness, and then the bacillus is a logical sequence. There is much attention being directed of late to prophylactic treatment. Would it not be as well to extend this system a little farther? and see if it is not possible to pass over the border a little way, cross the fence which science has erected between the realm of matter and the realm of the imponderable, and see if, after all, there may not be something to be accomplished in the way of regulation of disease before the enemy effects his invasion of the land? I believe we can meet with some measure of success if we divest ourselves of some of our preconceived notions and cease to take counsel of our denials, our limitations, our fears. It may be that there is something to be learned by looking at the bacillus theory from the mystic standpoint. For, let the materialist doubt and scout and deny as he will, there is that side of the question, and it is every day forcing itself more and more into recognition. There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamed of in our philosophy, and there always will be. Here was one who did not fear to attempt to wed science and religion. Had we more of such teachers, both science and religion would be the better for it, and possibly shortly we would have an exact science to deal with the physical ills of man. There can actually be no line drawn as to where material science ends and spiritual science begins. And because men have always attempted to do, confusion continually arises, which, blinding the scientist on the one hand and the religionist on the other, results in chaos. They know little of the forces at work or the principles involved, who imagine there is sufficient force in dissolving creeds or in the dying throes of materialism to greatly retard the progress of these truths by sneers or ridicule, or to prevent their triumph by any opposition that can be brought to bear against them. The secret doctrine was the universally diffused religion of the ancient world. Proof of its diffusion, authentic records of its history, a complete chain of documents showing its character and presence in every land, together with the teachings of all its great initiates or masters, exist to this day in the secret crypts of libraries belonging to the secret schools and fraternities. The days of Constantine were the last turning point in history, the period of the supreme struggle that ended in the Western world, throttling the old religions in favor of the new ones, built on their bodies. Thence the vista into the far distant past, beyond the deluge and the Garden of Eden, began to be forcibly and relentlessly closed by every fair and unfair means against the indiscreet gaze of posterity. Every issue was blocked up, every record that hands could be laid upon destroyed. This same Constantine, who with his soldiers environed the bishops at the First Council of Nice, AD 325, and dictated terms to their deliberations, applied for initiation into the mysteries and was told by the officiating priest that no purgation could free him from the crime of putting his wife to death or from his many perjuries and murders. Every careful and unbiased student of history knows why the secret doctrine has been heard of so little since the days of Constantine. An exoteric religion and belief in personal God blotted it out, and yet the very Pentateuch conceals it, and for many students of the cabala of the coming century, the seals will be broken. There are three fundamental propositions which underlie the secret doctrine. 1. An omnipresent, eternal, boundless, and immutable principle on which all speculation is impossible, since it transcends the power of human conception and could only be dwarfed by any human expression or similitude. It is beyond the range and reach of human thought. In the words of Mandikya, unthinkable and unspeakable. This infinite and eternal cause, dimly formulated in the unconscious and unknowable of current philosophy, is the rootless root of all that was, is, or ever shall be. In Sanskrit, it is Sat. This Benes is symbolized in the secret doctrine under two aspects. On the one hand, absolute abstract space, representing bare subjectivity, the one thing which no human mind can either exclude from any conception or conceive of by itself. On the other hand, absolute abstract motion, representing unconditional consciousness. Spirit or consciousness and matter are, however, to be regarded not as independent realities, but as the two facets or aspects of the absolute, which constitutes the basis of conditional being, whether subjective or objective. Considering this metaphysical triad, the one reality, spirit and matter, as the root from which proceeds all manifestation, the great breath assumes the character of pre-circumflex cosmic ideation. 2. The second of the three postulates of the secret doctrine is the eternity of the universe in toto as a boundless plane, periodically the playground of numberless universes incessantly manifesting and disappearing, called the manifesting stars and the sparks of eternity. The eternity of the pilgrim, the monad or self in man, is like a wink of the eye of self-existence. The appearance and disappearance of worlds is like a regular ebb of flux and reflux. 3. The fundamental identity of all souls with the universal oversoul, the latter being itself an aspect of the unknown root, and the obligatory pilgrimage for every soul, a spark of the former, through the cycle of incarnation, in accordance with cyclic and karmic law during the whole term. The pivotal doctrine of the Eastern philosophy admits no privileges or specific gifts to man, save those won by his own soul by personal effort and merit, though a long series of development and possibly many incarnations. Souls are reincarnated many times, but not the person, which implies the body, for the body returns to the dust from whence it came. These things were taught by the Essenes, Gnostics, Therapeuti, and Jesus, and the doctrine is embodied in the parable of the talents, as thus explained. Into the soul of the individual is breathed the Spirit of God, divine, pure, and without blemish. It is part of God, and the individual has in his earth life to nourish that spirit and feed it as a flame with oil. When you put oil into a lamp, the essence passes into and becomes flame. So is it with the spirit of him who nourishes the soul. It grows gradually pure and becomes the soul. By this means the soul becomes the richer. And as in the parable of the talents, where God has given 5 talents, man pays back 10, or he returns nothing and perishes. When a soul has once become regenerate, it returns to the body only at its own free will, as a redeemer or messenger of light to those not yet regenerated. Such a one regains in the flesh the memory of the past. Regeneration or transmutation may take place in an instant, but it is rarely a sudden transition from the mortal to the immortal, and it is best that it comes gradually through normal growth, so that the marriage of the soul be only after a prolonged engagement. The doctrine of counterparts, so familiar to certain classes of spiritualists, is a travesty due to delusive spirits on the marriage of regeneration. Regeneration does not affect the interior man only. A regenerate person may have his body such that no poison will cause death and that disease cannot gain foothold. Zanoni, in Lytton's story, drinking the poisoned wine. At death, a portion of the spirit remains unconsumed, untransmuted, that is, unrefined. The spirit is fluid, and between it and vapor is this analogy. When there is a large quantity of vapor in a small place, it becomes condensed and is thick and gross. But when a portion is removed, the rest becomes refined and is rare and pure. So it is with the spirit. By the transmutation of a portion of its material, the rest becomes finer, rarer, and purer, and continues to do so more and more until it has all returned to God. The soul, after many incarnations and by the help of the Spirit, returns to the divine soul and becomes associated with God. Every soul must work out its own salvation. Salvation by faith and the vicarious atonement were not taught, as now interpreted by Jesus, nor are these doctrines taught in the esoteric scriptures. They are later and false perversions of the original doctrines. In the early church, as in the secret doctrine, there was not one Christ for the whole world, but a potential Christ in every man. Theologians first made a fetish of the impersonal, omnipresent divinity, and then tore Christos from the hearts of all humanity in order to deify Jesus, that they might have a God-man peculiarly their own. How much one's idea of God colors all his thoughts and deeds is seldom realized. The ordinary, crude, and ignorant conception of a personal God more often results in slavish fear on the one hand and atheism on the other. It is what Carlyle calls an absentee God, doing nothing since the 6 days of creation, but sitting on the outside and seeing it go. This idea of God carries with it, of course, the idea of creation as something already completed in time, when the fact is that creation is a process without beginning or end. The world, all worlds, are being created today as much as at any period in the past. Even the apparent destruction of worlds is a creative or evolutionary process. Emanating from the bosom of the all and running their cyclic course, day alternating with night on the outer physical plane, they are again indrawn to the invisible plane, only to re-emerge after a longer night and start again on a higher cycle of evolution. Theologians have tried in vain to attach the idea of immanence to that of personality and ended in a jargon of words and utter confusion of ideas. A personal absolute is not, except in potency. God does not think, but is the cause of thought. God does not love, he is love, in the perfect or absolute sense, and so with all the divine attributes. God is thus the concealed logos, the causeless cause. God never manifests himself to be seen of men except by symbolism. Creation is his manifestation. And as creation is not complete and never will be, and as it never had a beginning as such, there is a concealed or unrevealed potency back of and beyond all creation, which is still God. All men are brothers by right of being born of woman and through the same first cause and by all the laws of nature and by the very being of God. But so long as religion defines heresy as a crime or imagines a God with human attributes, man's inhumanity to man will continue to make countless millions mourn and find vent for all evil passions justified by their idea of God. Christ is no less divine because all men may reach the same divine state of perfection. It will be urged that there is no other name given under heaven or amongst men whereby we can be saved. This is the ineffable name which every initiate is to possess through becoming, and salvation and perfection are synonymous. Every act in the life of Jesus and every quality assigned to the Christ is to be found in the life of Krishna and in the legend of all the sun gods from the remotest time, showing thereby that in the hearts of man has always been found an understanding of what Christ, or the perfect man, should be. One of the principal reasons the Orthodox churchmen will find to oppose this view is not that it dethrones or degrades the Christ, but that it disproves the idea of the Christ as their exclusive possession and denies that all other religions are less divine than their own. The same selfishness is brought into religion that is indulged in regard to other possessions, such as wife and children, and other things highly valued, and the same partisan spirit that we find in politics, and this more than anything else appears to justify selfishness in general, militates against the institution of a reign of justice to all men, and prevents the founding of a great republic composed of all nations of the earth with equal opportunities to all. This idea of a brotherhood of man was a cardinal doctrine in the ancient mysteries, because the mysteries could not conceive of any favorite in the divine conception. Justice regards each individual of all the myriads constituting humanity with equal favor, granting to each one either the favor or the punishment earned. Justice of God toward all implies justice toward each other among men. This principle of justice is a universal law, and that such justice may be meted out to all, and the perfectibility of man's nature through evolution accomplished, necessitates reincarnation. The number of souls constituting humanity, though practically innumerable, is nevertheless definite. Hence the doctrine of pre-existence taught in all the mysteries applied to every child of woman born, all conditions in each life being determined by previous lives. Thus the fatherhood of God in the personification of divinity in humanity includes the universal and unqualified justice, which all men will receive sooner or later during their existence on the earth plane. No one can escape. The rich and favored sons of today will be, under such an absolutely just law, the beggars of tomorrow. The real initiates in all ages, knowing this from the lessons taught in the mysteries of initiation, have ever been the foes of autocrats, oligarchies, potentates, and oppression in every form, whether ecclesiastical or political. Neophytes are taught to obey the laws of the country in which they live. If such laws are clearly unjust, then they are at perfect liberty to work for their rescinding or replacement by just laws. Initiates are not agents of revolution, but of evolution. By enlightenment and persuasion, they may strive to reform a nation or a church, but they do not attempt to overthrow either. The true, lasting republic is the outgrowth of granting equal rights to all, and a jealous monarch in church or state will naturally oppose the diffusion of doctrines that tend to the liberation and enlightenment of the people. Mysticism does not preach a new religion. There can be none. It only reiterates the new commandment announced by Jesus as the mouthpiece of the new dispensation of that secret school, the Essenes, in which he had been trained and to which he belonged. This same commandment had been announced by every great reformer of religion since the dawn of history. Drop the theological barnacles from the religion taught by Jesus and by the Essenes and Gnostics of the first centuries, and it is the true and eternal mysticism of the secret schools. Mysticism, or occultism, is not derived from the ancient religion, secret doctrine of the Kabbalah, but is the secret doctrine. The old Hebrew Kabbalah, as part of the great universal wisdom religion of antiquity, stands squarely for the equal rights and opportunities of all men, and this was actually personified in the Essenian order at the time Jesus lived. To churchitize mysticism is an impossibility. It cannot be bound by creeds. It is free, just as those must be free, even from self, who would belong to the secret schools. Dr. J.D. Buck, the universally respected mystic Mason, wrote, "The thinnest veil over the sublime mystery of the ineffable name is brotherhood and love. The gross darkness that hangs like a black veil over the Shekhinah is selfishness and hate. Even so hath it ever been, and so will it ever be, till brotherly love, relief, and truth reign universally in the hearts of all humanity. The refinements of so-called civilization do not change the essential nature of man. Beneath all these there sleeps or wakes a demon or an angel, and one of these is ever in chains, for no man can serve two masters." Had Dr. Buck lived a few years longer and witnessed the self-sacrifice of the millions during the late war, and the profiteering of others during this same time, both classes calling themselves Christians, his conclusions that demons still lived in some men would have been greatly strengthened. Possibly never in the history of the world, even when under clearly pagan rule, has so much selfishness been manifested by such a diversity of men in all classes as during these days of Reconstruction, propoundedly manifesting to the student of history that churchianity has undoubtedly been a failure because it has forgotten Christianity. The science and religion of the West are in perpetual conflict. The genius of this religion discerns faith and miracle as its foundation. Science holds as its ideal fact and purely materialistic law. Thus, religion is necessarily illogical, while science is materialistic to the extreme. And thanks to both, mankind is as far from real knowledge of the nature and destiny of the soul as it was 2,000 years ago. The conflict has long been maintained. It is a war to the death. Both science and religion are gradually being reformed, and long before the battle ceases, neither of the original champions will be found to exist in their present form. The religion of the secret schools is vastly different and in harmony. Faith and absolute law are at the base. So-called miracles rest upon law and justice. For God cannot be unjust that he may perform a miracle. Science, as acknowledged by the secret schools, is founded on logic, law, and spirit as the life of the material with which science deals. The Western world laughs at this, for looking at the secret doctrine and the mighty religions of India, Egypt, Greece, and Judea only from the outside, nothing but discord, superstition, and chaos can be seen. But if one examines the symbols, questions the mysteries, and searches out the root idea of the founders and of the prophets, harmony will be found throughout. Along diverse and often winding paths, one will always reach the same point, so that penetration into the arcanum of one of these religions means entrance into the secrets of the rest. Then a strange phenomenon takes place. By degrees, but in a widening circle, the doctrine of the initiates is seen to shine forth in the center of the religions like a sun clearing away its nebula. Each religion appears as a different planet. With each we change both atmosphere and celestial orientation, still it is always the same sun which illumines us. India, the mighty dreamer, plunges us along with herself into the dream of eternity. Egypt, sublime and imposing, austere as death, invites us to the journey beyond the grave and shows us there is no death. Enchanting Greece sweeps us along to the magic feasts of life and gives to her mysteries the seduction of her form, charming or terrible in turn, and of her ever-passionate soul, that soul which was burned out of her through her practice of taught and practiced by the priestess of hell, the poetess Sappho, a cult rapidly undermining Western civilization. Finally, Pythagoras scientifically formulated the esoteric doctrine, gives it the most nearly complete and concise expression it had ever had. From these, then, will come the science religion of the not far distant future. The Western theory of religion is that of a personal God and an arbitrary and equally mechanical, though miraculous, creation, of a revelation equally miraculous, of souls created as by arbitrary caprice of deity with the accidental cooperation of man, ever in violation of divine law. It talks of laws, but admits their abrogation through the will, caprice of God. It is true that neither science nor religion has openly formulated the foregoing creeds, but they are fair deductions from the postulates assumed, the logical results of a nature without intelligence, and a God who creates laws only to annul them at his own good pleasure so he may perform a miracle whereby to force his foolish children to both fear and believe in him, neither of which they inwardly do, though outwardly act as if they did. Reconciliation between such a science and such a religion becomes impossible because each is a contradiction of the other and to itself. Preaching law, it yet teaches the great lawgiver can abrogate all law. How vastly different this from the doctrine taught by Orpheus. God is one and eternally unchangeable. He reigns over all. The gods are diverse and innumerable, for divinity is eternal and infinite. The greatest gods are the souls of the constellations. Each constellation has its own suns and stars, earths and moons, and all issue from the celestial fire of Zeus, from the initial light. Half-conscious, inaccessible and unchangeable, they govern the mighty whole by their unvarying movements. Each revolving constellation draws along in its ethereal sphere phalanxes of demigods or radiant souls who were formerly human and who, after descending the scale of kingdoms, have gloriously ascended the cycles and finally issued from the round of generations. It is through these divine spirits that God breathes, acts and manifests himself, or rather, these form the breath of his living soul, the rays of his eternal consciousness. They rule over armies of lower spirits which govern the elements. They control the universe. Far and near they surround us, and although of immortal essence, they assume ever-changing forms according to nation, epoch or region. The impious man who denies their existence still dreads them. The pious man worships without knowing them. The initiate knows, attracts and sees them. I struggled to find them, braved death, and as is said, descended into hell to tame the demons of the abyss, to summon the gods from on high to my beloved Greece, that lofty heaven might unite with earth, listening with delight to strains divine. Celestial beauty will become incarnate in the flesh of woman. The fire of Zeus will run in the blood of heroes, and long before mounting to the constellations, the sons of the gods will shine forth like immortals. There is nothing negative in the secret doctrine, nor in the doctrines of Krishna, Orpheus, and the other gods. All they taught was of a positive nature. It is only in the Western interpretation of religion, which are oftentimes mere forgeries of the Eastern doctrines, that we find everything negative. A lie can never be positive because the positive element is missing. Krishna, an initiate as mighty as Orpheus, taught the doctrine of the immortal soul, its rebirths and mystical union with God. The body, he taught, envelops the soul, which makes therein its dwelling, and is a finished thing, but the indwelling soul is invisible, imponderable, incorruptible, eternal. The earthly man is threefold and foursquare, like the divinity of which he is the reflection, intelligence, soul and body. If the soul is united with the intelligence, it attains to sattva, wisdom and peace. If it remains uncertain between the intelligence and the body, it is dominated by rajas, passion, and turns from object to object in a fatal circle. If it abandons itself to the body, it falls into tamos, want of reason, ignorance and temporary death. This every man may observe in and about him. The soul never escapes the law, but always obeys it. This is the mystery of rebirths. As the depths of heaven are laid bare before the starry rays, so the abyss of life light up beneath the glory of this truth. When the body is dissolved, when sattva is in the ascendant, the soul flies away into the region of those pure beings who have knowledge of the sublime. When the body experiences this dissolution whilst rajas dominates, the soul once more comes to live amongst those who have bound themselves to things on earth. Again, if the body is destroyed when tamas dominates, the soul, whose radiance is dimmed by matter, is again attracted by the wombs of irrational beings. The devout man, surprised by death, after enjoying for some time the due reward of his virtues in superior realms of peace, finally returns again to inhabit a body in some holy and respectable family. But this kind of regeneration in this life is very difficult to attain. The man thus born again finds himself possessed of the same degree of application and advancement as regards the intellect as he had in his first body, and he begins to work fresh perfection through service and devotion. The mighty and profound secret, the sublime and sovereign mystery is to To attain to perfection, one must acquire the knowledge of unity, which is above wisdom. One must rise to the divine being who is above the personal soul, above the intelligence. This divine being, this sublime friend, is in each one of us. God dwells within each man, though few can find him. This is the path to salvation. Once thou hast perceived the perfect being who is above the world and within thyself, do thou decide to abandon the enemy, which takes the form of desire, control thy passions. The joys afforded by the senses are like wombs of future sufferings. Not only do good, but be good. Let the motive be in the action, not in its fruits. Abandon the fruits of thy works, but let each action be as an offering to the Supreme Being. The man who sacrifices his desire and works to the being whence proceed the beginnings of all things, and by whom the universe has been formed, attains to perfection by this sacrifice. One in spirit, he acquires that spiritual wisdom which is above the worship of offerings and experiences a felicity divine. For he who within himself finds his happiness, his joy, his peace and light, is one with God. Know then that the soul which has found God is freed from rebirth and death, old age and grief. Such a soul drinks the water of immortality. Thus Krishna explained his doctrine, which was really the secret doctrine of the ancients, given in language harmonizing with the age. By inner contemplation, he gradually raised his disciples to the sublime truths which had been opened out to himself through his visions, the result of living the exalted life. The old universal wisdom religion or secret doctrine is scientific to the last degree, for beneath both science and religion is the philosophy which discerned the ordinary process of eternal nature with no missing links in evolution and no caprice or contradiction anywhere in cosmos. This is the science religion that is being implanted in the Western world by the secret schools, and as it grows, so will the formal creeds and materialistic science be swept aside. The man reaching perfection is a Christ, and Christ is united to God. This is the birthright of every human soul. It was taught in all the greater mysteries of antiquity. But the exoteric creeds of churchianity, derived from the parables and allegories in which this doctrine was concealed from the ignorant and the profane, have accorded this supreme consummation to Jesus alone and made it obscure to all the rest of humanity. In place of this, the grandest doctrine ever revealed to man, theologians have set up salvation by faith in a man-made creed and the authority of the church to bind or loose on earth or in heaven. Law is annulled, justice dethroned, merit ignored, effort discouraged, and sectarianism, atheism, and materialism are the result. How could it be otherwise when the millions of poor are at the mercy of the profiteers and unionized labor, and still have no greater assurance of gaining the kingdom of heaven than those who systematically rob and degrade them? America is called a Christian nation. All who do not belong to one of the established churches are frowned upon, but the student in the secret schools cannot see the consistency, and why not? As there is before us a letter from a friend living in St. Joseph, Missouri, which states in part, "There was much suffering in St. Joseph, and fate visited all alike. Slack 2/3 dirt was put up by dealers, and people had to pay $10 to $15 a ton. It was an outrage on humanity. Coal sold at $10 in 1/4 ton lots, and half the time dealers would not deliver it for less than $3 to $5 per quarter ton. Many poor could not pay this on top of coal prices. All this on the 10th of December, bitter cold weather, and the poor forced to meet the demands of robbers or frees. All these dealers live in a church-going community. Most of them, if not all, belong to some church, are known as Christians, yet in spite of all this, they are allowed to continue their robbery of the poor and needy and continue to belong to the church and be received as respected citizens. This, the student of the secret doctrine contends, is the result of the doctrines of salvation by faith and vicarious atonement. Such men could not for a moment continue in the secret schools because they are guilty of the greatest crime man can commit, namely, injustice to those too weak to defend themselves. The secret schools teach the equal rights to justice and fair dealing to the weak as well as the strong. All real initiation is an internal, not an external or formal process. The outer ceremony is useful only so far as it symbolizes and illustrates and thereby makes clear the inward change taking place. In many of the fraternities, ceremonial initiation is entirely dispensed with until after inner initiation has been accomplished, as it often clouds the mind that would otherwise be clear. In true initiation, no ceremonies are necessary. To be initiated truly means to be transformed. To be transformed is to have become regenerated, and this results only by trial, by effort, by self-conquest, through sorrow, disappointment, failure, and a daily renewal of the conflict. It is in this that man must work out his own salvation. The consummation of initiation is mastership according to the degree one has been able to overcome the finite. It is to have found the Christos, for these are the same. They are the goal, the perfect consummation of human evolution through conscious development. By constant struggle and daily conflict, the initiate has conquered self. Life after life he has gathered experience. Truly hath he been a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. He has assailed all problems, studied all science, exhausted all litanies, apprehended all philosophies, practiced all arts. At every step he has loved and helped humanity more and more, and sought his own benefit less and less. Grown familiar thus with all planes of life by sore trial, by bitter conflict, by frequent defeat, by hope deferred, almost despairing, he has at last mastered the selfish self, and so desiring nothing, everything comes to him. The initiate of the highest degree, one who has power to command the elemental spirits to create the elementals, can, through the same agency, heal the disorders and regenerate the functions of the body, often in himself and in many others. And this he does by an exercise of his will, which sets in motion the etheric fluids. Such a person, an initiate or hierarch of the secret science, is necessarily a person of many incarnations. It was principally in the East that these were to be found, for it was there that the oldest souls were wont to congregate. It was in the East that human science first arose, and the soil and astral fluids were charged with power as a vast battery. The hierarch of the Orient both was himself an older soul and had the magnetic support of a chain of older souls, and the earth beneath his feet and the medium around him were charged with electric force to a degree not to be found elsewhere. It was for this reason that the East was far more enlightened than the West. This, alas, is no longer true because of the negativeness into which the peoples of the East allowed themselves to fall. And now men of the West are the masters of the great East, and the millions of souls in the East are gradually falling into the like sleep which overtook Egypt, Greece, Persia, and other highly developed civilizations of the past. How can man become such a master according to the doctrine? The man who is without fear and without concupiscence, who has courage to be absolutely poor and absolutely just and kind, who is ready and willing to study, obey, and live the life taught, when it is all one whether he has gold in his possession or has none, whether he owns the house and lands on which he lives or whether another does, whether he has worldly reputation or whether he is an outcast, who is ready to defend the poor but just against power and injustice. Such an one is ready for the path. It is not wrong to have possessions, but it is necessary to hold the attitude that all material things are merely for use in the climb to the divine. It is not essential to be a virgin. It is important to set no value on flesh. There is nothing so difficult to attain as this equilibrium, the double triangle, the white interlaced with the black. When you have ceased to wish to retain or to burn, then you have the remedy in your hands, and it is a hard and a sharp one and a terrible ordeal. Nevertheless, be thou unafraid. Control the five senses, and above all the taste and the touch. The power is within you if you will to attain it. Eat no dead thing which contained warm blood. Drink no fermented drinks while you are under training. Make living entities of all the elements of your body. Take your food full of life, and let not the touch of the denatured pass your lips. Remember that without self-control there is no power over death. When a man has attained power over the body, the process of ordeal is no longer necessary. The neophyte is under vow. The initiate and hierarch is free. Jesus, after his training, came eating and drinking, for all things had become lawful to him. He had undergone while a neophyte with the Essenes, and had freed the will and the desire. The object of the trial and the vow is polarization. When the fixed is volatilized, the Magian is free. Before Jesus was become the Christ, he was subject, and his initiation lasted 30 years. All things are lawful to the hierarch, for he knows the nature and value of all. Through natural evolution, man is continually climbing upward to higher planes. Evolution fortified by conscious development help him to reach the goal centuries or eons before natural evolution could possibly bring him to it. Through development, his five senses are adjusted to observations and experiences of the physical plane, and he has spiritual experiences. The senses are narrow and circumscribed, yet even these become refined. His tastes alter, his tendencies ascend. He is reaching outward as his sympathies expand, and upward as his ideals become higher. There is revealed to him a whole world of experience in which the lower senses play no part, a world of aspiration in which the selfish self is not the goal. The very physical bounds of this self are loosening, expanding, and disappearing. Hitherto, he has been conscious of flashes of intuition, of knowing things he has seemingly never learned. He feels inner meanings and senses subtler powers, not only in visions and intuitions of the day, but in dreams of the night he has experiences beyond the bounds of sense. He learns the power of concentrated thought. By conquering self, his will becomes strong. By subduing passion, his mind creatively powerful. He has premonitions of coming events, for all events and thoughts and things exist first on the subjective plane and are precipitated thence into matter. He may become clairaudient and clairvoyant. He has broken the bonds of self and begins to function on higher planes of being, thus coming into harmonious touch with the divine. The problem of genuine initiation or training in the secret science consists in placing all the operations of the body under the dominion of the will until the soul can begin to function, in freeing the ego from the dominion of the appetites, passions, and the whole lower nature. The idea is not to despise the body, but to purify and refine it, not to destroy the appetites, but to elevate and control them absolutely. This mastery of the lower nature does not change the key of the physical nature as such, but subordinates it to that of a higher plane. Without this subordination, the clamorous lower nature drowns out all higher vibrations, as if in an orchestra the bass viols and the drums only could be heard, and noise rather than harmony result. The first point to be made in real initiation is for the neophyte to control his thoughts. Instead of passively and helplessly receiving all suggestions that come from the physical sense, or appetites, or all that come from ambition, selfishness, and pride, he selects and chooses and wills what thoughts shall come. In this manner he acquires mastery over his own mind and frees his will from the dominion of desire, or rather elevates and purifies his desires. In the ancient mysteries, not every initiate became a master. There were the lesser and the greater mysteries. To the lesser, all were eligible. To the greater, very few. And of these, fewer still were ever exalted to the sublime and last degree. Some remained for a lifetime in the lower degrees, unable to progress further on account of constitutional defect or mental and spiritual incapacity. This is just as true at the present time. The mysteries unfolded the building of worlds, the religion of nature, the possibility of the universal brotherhood of man, the immortality of the soul, and the natural evolution of humanity. No ceremony was artificial or meaningless. No symbol, however grotesque to the ignorant, was merely fanciful. Thales and Pythagoras learned in the sanctuaries of Egypt that the earth revolved around the sun, but they did not attempt to make this generally known, because to do so would have been necessary to reveal one of the great secrets of the temple, the double law of attraction and radiation, or of sympathy and antipathy, or of fixedness and movement, which is the principle of creation and the perpetual cause of life. The truth was ridiculed by Lactantius and long after sought to be proved a falsehood by papal Rome. The ideal in church and state, the motive for the ecclesiastical and political hierarchies, has undoubtedly been in all ages to govern men professedly for their own good. The secret doctrine teaches man to govern himself first, then to work in harmony with all others for the ideal republican church. So long as hierarchies subordinate all things to the real benefit of man and give light and knowledge to all in such measure as they can receive, they are a blessing and not a curse. When, however, the potentate suppresses knowledge, claims power by divine right or by inheritance rather than by proof of knowledge, apostolic succession, and by service done to man. When ignorance or disbelief is published as a crime, and men torture the body or agonize the mind under the devil's plea to save the soul, then does the hierarchy become an enemy of both God and man. Freedom and enlightenment are the only real saviors of mankind, while ignorance is the father of superstition and selfishness the parent of vice. The ancient mysteries were organized schools of learning, and knowledge was the signal of progress and the basis of fellowship. The doors of real initiation were open to women as to men, as they are at the present time. The Illuminati and the Rose Cross both admit women to their training on equal basis with men, though it is regrettable admission must be made that more women enter out of curiosity and repudiate their solemn vow than is the case with men. Reference to the school of the Illuminati is not to the German order, which admittedly was political, treasonable, and atheistic, believing neither church, government, or the sacredness of marriage and the family. The secret schools absolutely had no connection in any shape or form with that order. The ancient wisdom concerned itself largely, as do the secret schools at present, with the souls of men, and undertook to elevate the material life by purifying the soul and exalting its ideals. It teaches that souls are sexless in themselves, and that the sex of the body is a selection by the incarnating soul. No civilization known to man has ever risen to any great heights or long maintained its supremacy that debased woman. The secret doctrine demonstrates with unmistakable clearness that sexual debasement in any form is the highway of degeneracy and destruction of both man and woman, of nations quite as certainly as of individuals, that it destroys both the body and soul of man. Ever since the time of Atlantis, the true initiates and masters have been the keepers of the great school. These initiates have taught the secret religions and true science. The ancient governments were patriarchal, the ruler was always a master initiate, and the people were regarded by him as his children. Our Story of Atlantis by Dr. Phelan, Secret School of Atlantis, Luxor and Elephante. In those days, a reigning prince did not consider it beneath his dignity to go into the desert alone, and there sit at the feet of some inspired recluse whereby he might receive more light, which he would dispense to those who were ready to receive such instructions. Instead of teaching superstition and idolatry, when the real meaning of symbolism is revealed, it will be found to be the thinnest veil ever imposed between the sublime wisdom and the comprehension of men. The old gods were the symbolical or personified attributes of nature through which man was taught to realize the existence of the Supreme Being. This was not polytheism nor idolatry, but a system of training which could not be defined, and pointing to that which must forever remain unknown and unknowable, except by the aid of symbol, parable, and allegory. No word painting known to man seems half so beautiful as some of these ancient parables and allegories. Not only was every oblation to love and duty portrayed, every joy of home and affection illustrated, and the most common duties of life, feats of valor, devotion, and self-sacrifice depicted, but in a language so musical and in rhythm and meter so perfect as to make the whole recital more like a symphony than a poem. This symbolic writing is continued by us in the present day in chemistry, medicine, and other science. The parables were not invented to conceal the truth from those who could comprehend it, or to keep the people in ignorance whereby the priests and rulers might preserve their power, for no initiate cares for power, except that he may do good to humanity, nor does he seek to control any people or office. The people seek the initiate. We seek no man, but men seek us. Power did not come through the people, but by development and possession of the mysteries, continually exercised and exemplified in all the works of the initiate, was the badge of office and sign of authority. To such a priesthood the people rendered most willing obedience. The doors of initiation were open, then as at present, to all who had evolved the capacity to know, to dare, to do, and to keep silent in regard to that which should not be prematurely revealed. With the light of the great lodge standing in the midst, the religion of the people was a perfect representative of science and philosophy, in which superstition and idolatry found no place. Hence the symmetry in all the old wisdom religions. There was originally but one secret doctrine. In later times, many nations had the same philosophy, but each had its own symbolism and method of expression. The religions of Egypt, Chaldea, and Persia had back of them the same secret doctrine, the same mysteries formerly taught in the great lodge of Atlantis. And it was from these they were transplanted to Egypt, India, Asia, and other countries. This religion was both scientific and philosophical. Egypt and Chaldea repeated the folly of India and perished, with the exception of a few initiates who remained true. These few kept their vows and placed the secret doctrines in the archives of the temples, and taught those who became the future masters, such as Hermes, Zoroaster, Confucius, and others who thereafter taught the secret doctrines to a selected few, and revived the old religion under new names and forms, harmonizing with the customs and forms of their respective countries. Pythagoras and the schools of the Persian Magi, as well as the Ansareth of Syria, where Dr. P.B. Randolph was trained and taught, keeping the true light burning, always to be found by those truly seeking. The Venerable Order of the Magi, coming down the ages from the time before Jesus through direct apostolic dissension, exists today and teaches the same age-old secret doctrines. The conquest of Egypt by Cambyses completed the ruins of the land of the pharaohs, and Pythagoras became the link between the old philosophy and the Christian mysteries, together with the Jewish cabala derived jointly from the mysteries of Egypt and Syria. From the Essenes and the schools of Alexandria, then in their glory, and from the cabala, the Christian mysteries were derived. In fact, the Christian mysteries were none other than the ancient mysteries and secret doctrine, changed, it is true, to meet with ideas, customs, and laws of the time. During the first 3 centuries after the time of Jesus, these doctrines flourished openly, but were finally forced to be taught secretly, and a selected few through the conquest of Constantine, followed by the Dark Ages. The religion of Jesus was that of the ancient mysteries. It was the same wisdom religion, though perhaps the ethical features were more pronounced as necessitated among what was termed a generation of vipers. The ethical teachings of Jesus in time gave place to priestcraft and sacerdotalism, to worldly power and thirst for conquest, and the religion, or rather ceremonialism, of Constantine was finally succeeded by the Holy Inquisition, a reign of torture and bloodshed. During this reign of terror, the secret schools were suppressed with an iron hand, though in spite of all the Inquisition could do, the schools flourished and never wanted for candidates. As the Holy Inquisition gradually lost force, pretenders to occult and mystic powers arose, and these charlatans did untold harm to the secret doctrine. There are many names in history covered with obloquy and their possessors charged with fraud and imposition who were genuine initiates. The seeker should distinguish between self-conviction that comes from the pretender's own mouth and those accusations which come from others and are unsupported by evidence. As a fact, the true master or initiate never, under any circumstances, makes the claim that he is such. The man or the woman who openly claims to be either an initiate, an adept, or a master is never what he claims to be, but merely a pretender. The pretender is usually loaded with honors and found rolling in wealth as the regard of his deceit and lying, of fraud and corruption, which he is shrewd enough to conceal from the masses, but is apparent to the initiate or the master. Man betrays his character, his heredity, his ideas, and all his past life in every lineament of his face, in the pose of his body, in his gait, in the lines of his hands, in the tone of his voice, and in the expression of his eyes especially. No man possesses character. Character is that which he is, and not something apart from himself. One need not be a master to discover all this. He need only observe, think, and reason on what he sees. The individual who is really sincere and devout will not fail to recognize sincerity and true devotion in an acquaintance or in any character in history that possessed these virtues. Hence, the faithful student of the secret science, though not himself an initiate, soon learns to recognize by unfailing signs those in the present or the past who were really initiates and who had understanding of the wisdom religion. The real initiate is often gibbeted by the populace and anathematized by the church, because he is neither time-serving nor willing to barter the truth for gold. All along the line of history, from the foundation of Atlantis to the present time, may be found those who possessed the true light, initiates who concealed both their wisdom and their own identity from vulgar notice and foolish praise. They walked the earth in the past, as many do at present, unseen and unrecognized by the multitude, but always known to their associates and to all real seekers. These initiates or masters constitute in every age, as they do at the present time, the great school. They are the masters of the fraternities known as the Rose Cross, the Magi, and the Illuminati. For be it known to all those who would find the light, to all who would trod the path, these secret schools exist today as they did in the past, and initiates are to be found in them in greater number today than since the time of the fall of Egypt the Glorious. Whether these initiates congregate beneath vaulted domes or meet at stated times, no one would be likely to know unless he belongs to the same degree as those called. But one thing is certain: they help to bring knowledge to humanity when most needed, and often shape the destinies of nations. They are working today in the West as they have never labored before. They are enabled to give their services to many because the way has been prepared for them by those who know, and the present century will yet know more of them. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.